Hello, it's Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet, welcoming you to another episode of VETchat, the UK's #1 veterinary podcast. I'm really honoured today to have a good friend of mine, Virginie Goffaux, on the line. I met Virginie just prior to the pandemic, actually. We were at a meeting together. Who would have thought that it would be 4 years before we met again? I was over in Belgium. I've always wanted, out of interest, I'm a bit of a history buff, and I studied O-level, GCSE level, revolutionary history, 1789 to 1870 in Europe. And Virginie lives close to a famous little village called Braine-d'Alleau. Of course, nobody will know where that is or what that signifies, Virginie, unless you live in Belgium. But of course, if we were going to be completely accurate, the Battle of 1815, which we call Waterloo, I actually live in Waterloo, should be called the Battle of Braine-d'Alleau, shouldn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So the monument to this famous battle where Napoleon lost to the Duke of Wellington is in Braine-l'Alleud, but the monument is in Waterloo. So they have the claim to fame, even though it's not geographically accurate.
Well, I think the reason I'm told that the battle was called Waterloo was because Wellington actually stayed at the big hotel in Waterloo the night before the battle, and that was his battle headquarters, as it were,
Yes, which
and hence
is this.
why it's
Yeah.
called Waterloo. And who knows, had it not been called Waterloo but Braine-d'Alleau, then of course I might now be living in a suburb of Liverpool called Braine-d'Alleau, but I live in a suburb
That's
called
possible,
Waterloo.
and then we wouldn't have that great ABBA song, would we?
Exactly. Well, yeah, Braine-d'Alleau doesn't trip off the tongue quite as easily, does it,
No,
as
it's
Waterloo?
not quite as aesthetically pleasing to the tongue now. So
But it was great meeting you before Christmas. We had a good chat about a number of topics, some of which we'll cover during the podcast. But I think just so people kind of get to know you better before we start on the podcast proper, um, people will notice that you're living in Belgium now, but there is a touch of an Atlantic, mid-Atlantic, or transatlantic accent. So tell us, how has this all happened?
Well, so yes, I am Belgian in origin, and my parents are Belgian. And when I was 5, my father's job transferred him to a country town in southern Tennessee. And so this is where I grew up in the country with a lot of horses, and not my horses, unfortunately, but a lot of horses, cats and dogs and farm animals. And then we moved up to Nashville, the capital of Tennessee, and I went to Vanderbilt for my undergrad in biology, and then I went to UT Vet School in Knoxville. Yeah, so and then proceeded to move around the country for various jobs in veterinary medicine, large animals in North Carolina, small animals in South Carolina and New Jersey, and then I worked for Virbac Pharmaceuticals in Texas and Shearing Plow in New Jersey, and then somehow managed to move back to Belgium in 2003. So that's where I am now. It's quite as
And I
good.
spent a very enjoyable Easter last Easter in the state of Tennessee. Based myself mainly in Nashville with my wife. My wife is a big Dolly Parton fan, so I'd been to Nashville before. I won the Frank Beatty Travel Scholarship in '97 to go to the Durham conference there and
Oh,
to
right.
spend 3 weeks with Danny Scott and Bill Miller
Okay.
at the vet school in Cornell. So I'd been there before. She was very keen to see it. We went down to Memphis to see the site of, well, obviously Elvis, the king, but obviously there were
Very
also the other king sadly
the mighty
died
Memphis.
in Memphis. So we saw his motel where he'd been tragically assassinated. And then finally we moved up to Sevierville, where, of course, Dolly
I'm
comes from.
sorry, it's pronounced Sevierville.
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 Sevierville, where the Smoky Mountains and Dollywood is, and we had a great holiday. It's a beautiful state.
It's
And
a
in fact, we
beautiful state.
actually
It's
dodged a tornado, which made life quite exciting on the way down to Memphis. So
cool.
all exciting stuff. So basically, moving back to Belgium in 2003, and obviously, during your time as a vet, you've been very involved in academia, in practice, in pharma. also with EBVS doing something, as an educator into clients as well, haven't you? Just tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
EBVS.
Yeah, so in 2019, and this kind of ties in with the chronic disease story, which we're going to tell here in a minute. I wanted to do something on my own, something where I could manage my own time and chronic illness at the same time. And so I decided, I thought that starting a company would be easier on my body and mind. It wasn't, but it's the best years that I've spent, I think, professionally. So I started a company that aimed to provide video education by interviewing to the general public, to pet owners, by interviewing the top specialists in Europe. And so, through a partnership with the European Board of Veterinary Specialists and relationships with just many, many delightful specialists in Belgium, France, and the Netherlands, created over 500 short educational videos for pet owners on everything from chronic disease. I'm sorry, everything from preventive care, how to pick a pet, to breed-related diseases, age-related diseases, heart diseases in the dog and cat, breed dermatologic diseases, etc., parasites. And so, yeah, just and created wonderful relationships and friendships with that. And so, right now working with a digital education company to try and get those into a good format that'll be easier to share with the public.
Fantastic, Virginie. It's interesting. As vets, we're very much at the front line fighting disease, the foot and mouth pandemic in the UK in 2001. As an example, which obviously was a terribly stressful time, for
Yeah.
large animal vets. But I remember as a student, and as a young vet, I went out to a lot of farms taking bloods to check for brucellosis. So TB, the dairy herd at that time in the 1990s, we were concerned about TB. We still are. But brucellosis, I think we more or less eradicated by blood tests, etc. And I think, I was fortunate in a sense that it was the late 80s, early 90s when I was doing a lot of this testing. And in some ways, it was incredibly rare brucellosis then. But of course, brucellosis had been a serious debilitating disease, not only for cattle, but, particularly for vets, stockmen who
Yeah.
were coming into contact with those
Yeah.
animals.
Yeah.
Obviously, people drinking non-pasteurized contaminated milk. And the disease that actually came about was a disease called undulant recurrent fever. And it was
Mhm.
so bad and so up and down. People would have fevers, they would
Yes.
get
Yeah.
depressed with it. And, vets took their own life. And obviously, we'd met in 2019, not been able to meet since. And I think the value of those face to face meetings in a lovely cafe in Waterloo was we were able to spend some really good quality hours together, really delving deep into this whole area of chronic illness. I mean, does seem to be a problem that's increasing. And it was fascinating to learn about your particular story, about some of these tick-borne diseases like Lyme's disease, but also, Bartonella, cat scratch disease in humans. 30% of cats carry this. We know it's also carried via flea bites as well.
Yeah.
So there's lots of potential for us to catch things as vets.
Yeah.
But perhaps this is an area that, uh, you know, post that Brucella recurrent fever that I think was very well recognised, and
Hmm.
certainly by the 90s, and thank God we were moving away from it because we'd managed to eradicate brucellosis to a large extent. Now with global warming, tick-borne disease, if anything, is becoming more common. Ticks are becoming more common. They carry some nasty infections, fleas also. So tell us a little bit about your story around chronic illness, and maybe also we can delve then later on into some of these particular diseases as well.
Yeah, sure. So, um, I grew up around animals from a very early age, and so that's, way before I ever thought about becoming a veterinarian. And then, of course, you're around a lot of animals. And I think that as veterinarians, we sort of see ourselves as invincible. I think, we if we get a cat scratch, we'll kind of blow it off or whatever. Oh, it's okay. I'll just put a little soap on it. Don't worry about it. And so we do, I think, have this sort of invincibility um, idea of ourselves, and not only that, but we almost feel like our lives and our health is much less important than the health of our patients. And so I think maybe we pay less attention to our own health than to that of our patients. I think that's just maybe a general statement that I'd like to make about what kind of people we are. And we're also, I think we tend to be very focused people, and people who are hardworking and who, shrug off discomfort for the sake of our mission, our passion, which is veterinary, treating animals. And the other thing I like to say is that chronic disease is a nasty little thing because it sneaks up on you. And a lot of times it's invisible. And so, chronic disease for you may be, constant low grade, or maybe fluctuating levels of pain or fatigue, chronic fatigue. And it may be depression, it may be anxiety, and it may be difficulty in getting over a viral infection, and you're just like, ugh, I'm maybe, and combined with, of course, what we know about the medical profession, and in particular the veterinary profession, which is a very stressful environment to work in. It's very demanding. We know about the time pressures. We know about, now with the internet, the kind of social media pressures that we have, and people, giving you bad reviews, and people being more and more demanding. So from a psychological point of view, veterinary medicine is more difficult now. And
Also, I think, Virginie, a little bit hidden. I met you in 2019, had no idea
you would have
that
had no
this was
idea.
something you were battling against. You just came across as a very vivacious woman.
That's right.
So people don't recognize it. And I suppose a bit like the kind of mental health thing, which has come on so much,
Yeah,
we we maybe aren't as compassionate and sympathetic towards it either, compared with somebody who's got a broken leg. That's very obvious, isn't it?
that's correct. Yeah, yeah, it isn't obvious. And of course, we do our very best to hide it, because it doesn't people don't like hearing people complain about how they feel. And we always want to put our best foot forward, and so we're going to hide if we
Yeah.
don't feel good as much as possible. And so, I've been dealing with decades and decades of low, medium to high level of chronic pain, decades of it, and fatigue and depression sometimes, and anxiety. And by and large, I've got a few sort of radiographic abnormalities in my spine and some arthrosis, and I was like, oh well, I guess it's just because I'm a little arthritic, and maybe I just push myself too hard, and maybe that's why I'm tired. Blow it off, blow it off, blow it off. Um, and then in 2015, at age 47, out of nowhere, I was training for a half marathon. So I've always been very athletic, health conscious in my diet. I've never really drank or smoked or anything like that. And so out of nowhere, I have a heart attack. And they detect that I have quite a lot of arterial debris, quite a lot of atherosclerosis, which has no reason for being there. They're like, oh, we don't know. And I'm kind of a high-strung, energetic person, so they're like, oh, maybe it's stress, and it's takotsubo, which is that heart attack that comes from great stress. I have stress like everyone else has stress. Do I think it's stress worth causing a heart attack? Not really. And so the diagnosis was, arterial plaques. Don't really know why it happened. Don't really know why you have plaques. Just take aspirin and you'll be fine. So 6 months later, I become crippled with debilitating pain, and brain fog and cognitive disorders, memory loss, really inability to focus, inability, and calculating abilities that are diminished. And then I go to see some doctors, and a rheumatologist says, "Oh, you have fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue." So he prescribes painkillers and sleep medicine, and says, "Good luck with that." None of that works, of course. And so as the years go on, I become progressively more in pain, and more exhausted. And I'm still trying to hold down full-time jobs in the pharmaceutical industry, and it's becoming impossible. The doctor puts me on disability here in Belgium, and then I'm like, as a person of kind of our ilk, the veterinary ilk, I am like, I have to do something. I have to work. And so I created this Animed Solutions, thinking that it would be easier, but it wasn't. It was much harder. And in doing my EBVS specialist interviews, I came across this wonderful woman who's a small animal internal medicine specialist, who told me her story about Bartonella. And she said, I was wheelchair bound for several years of my life, and I've been suffering with this with neurologic problems, and of course extreme fatigue and pain, and didn't know what to do. Went to many doctors and couldn't find relief. And she said, then I went and was referred to this doctor, this specialist in Flanders in Belgium. He saved my life. And I was like, whoa, that's a big deal. He saved your life. He says, and she says, I'm back to normal. I'm back to myself after 7 years of debilitation. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess maybe I should see this guy. So I make an appointment with this doctor last summer 2023. And he looks at me and he does a thorough anamnesis, and he listens to my history, my medical history. And he looks at me and he looks at and he does a physical exam, and he says, I'm 90% sure that you have active infections with one, two, or three of the following organisms: Babesia, Bartonella, and Borrelia. And that you have an autoimmune syndrome that is the result of this, and that this is the cause of your decades of chronic illness, and that's probably the cause of the heart attack that you had. And I said, okay, sounds a little witch doctory. All right. So I had to sign an agreement to do all of the testing he wanted to do, because it was going to cost me thousands of euros, which it did. And 2 months later, after all the tests came in, he says, I have good news. I said, okay. He says, you're going to be one of the few people in this world who gets healthier with age. And I said, okay. He said, you do in fact have Babesia, active Bartonella, and active Borrelia, not Lyme's Borrelia, but other species of Borrelia, which cause something called relapsing fever. So Lyme's negative, but positive for other Borrelia. You also have active Epstein-Barr virus, which has been kept active by the extreme immunosuppression that you're dealing with these parasites and bacteria. You also have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. You have low blood volume and baroreceptors that don't function. You have irritable bowel syndrome, and you have temporary dementia. You have cognitive impairment as a result of these bugs affecting the nervous system in a very, very negative way, which can also lead to, severe depression as well. So, that all falls into line. And your heart attack was due to the Bartonella. Bartonella invades the endothelium and causes atherosclerosis, and can even affect the myocardium directly. So he's in one big diagnostic effort has given me the precise reason why I've had decades of health problems. And
of course, it's interesting, Virginie, if if you're not aware of these diseases, if it's not on your differential diagnosis list, you'll never actually make that diagnosis. So if doctors aren't thinking about this and we as vets aren't thinking about it, then it's not going to be diagnosed. And then even if we do think about doing tests, of course, not all tests are 100% sensitive, specific, and accurate. So they can be missed. And I know you kind of have got some information about that. I remember when I newly qualified and a pathologist got me to do a test and then said, well, because of that test, it was a urine cortisol creatinine ratio. This dog that you've got has Cushing's disease. And as a young vet, I took the pathologist at his word. And of course, it wasn't. One of the diagnoses it could be was Cushing's, but there were other things going on. So it's important that while we know that there's a lot of really clever pathologists around, we shouldn't treat them as gods. They, like us, also make mistakes and make incorrect diagnoses, don't they?
Well, that's correct, and it's not just the pathologist; it's the tests themselves.
Yeah.
So, especially with these kinds of infections, there for the majority of the tests that you can run on these, there's an enormous amount of false positive and false negative, across the board.
Hmm.
Some organisms, and I'll just use Borrelia as an example, is particularly hard to test for because not only does it have a lot of antigenic variation that allows it to escape detection and also escape treatment, but it creates a biofilm around itself to hide in the body. And so, if the doctor doesn't know that you need to first treat the patient with a little over a week of a supplement that will dissolve that biofilm, that will make it detectable, you're going to get false results. Not only that, tests that are currently available for Borrelia species are simply inaccurate. The only test that this doctor swears is actually accurate is a phage PCR test. So if the phage is present, the Borrelia is present. But that's the only test he trusts. But there are so many Borrelia tests out there that are simply inaccurate. And so we're talking about a diagnostic and therapeutic problem that is global, that lies in that most doctors don't know about these diseases and the co-infections. Most ticks that will bite you will be carrying and transmitting more than one disease
Hmm.
that are not looked for. If it's not Lyme's with the bullseye, doctors don't think about that being
Yeah.
a possibility. If you don't have super swollen lymph nodes, they don't think about Bartonella. Uh, they don't understand chronic infection, and then you have to know, yeah, which tests and how to interpret it in a very holistic anamnesis of the patient. Very few doctors have those capabilities and also relationships with laboratories that can give accurate results.
I
So,
think, Virginie, the other thing that you mentioned is obviously the expertise, but also he spent a significant amount of time with you in that first consult, which allowed
correct.
him to take a really, really good history. And I found the same thing with my dermatology service. Obviously, I knew a little bit more than most vets would know about dermatology, but I think the biggest blessing I had, was the fact that I could spend an hour with the client, particularly that first consult, spending time on the history, watching the dog as I was taking the history. And quite often, by the end of that 20 minutes, half an hour, I was pretty sure I knew the one or two or three things it could be. And then it was just a case of bringing the tests in to actually differentiate all that, which, clearly would take a little bit more time. But sometimes I remember two young doctors brought in a dog, and you could see the dog was itchy and scratchy for the 20 minutes it was there. Of course, the one question, do you have lesions as well? These were both young GPs. Oh, yeah, we scratch quite a lot as well. Well, I think I might know what's going on here.
Yeah, yeah,
But of course, that was all just down to taking good history. And then, of course,
yeah.
being good at finding scabies mites on a scrape. And if you couldn't find them on a scrape, you could do a blood test.
Yeah.
So the history and having that extra, he obviously has a lot more knowledge, but that extra knowledge in that area is critical, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and most GPs won't have that kind of
Yeah.
time, uh,
Or
or
knowledge.
knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what I'm doing right now, as you know, Anthony, is I'm sort of on a mission to sensitize not only veterinary professionals, but also other people who are at high risk for contracting these types of diseases. Anyone who works outdoors, and hunters, environmentalists, farmers, to this, and also to develop almost a service to help people navigate the healthcare system, because it's not always easy. In the U.S. and I think maybe in the U.K., you can't just get, like here in Belgium, we can just make an appointment with a specialist. If we get the name of a great specialist, we can just make an appointment with that specialist. In the U.S., you generally, I mean, I'm not up on it yet. I need to do more research, but you have to go through your GP and get approval to go see a specialist. Then maybe they'll decide which specialist you can go see.
Mm.
You don't necessarily have a choice of which labs are doing, or analysis on your
Yeah.
samples. So these are all things that I'm still working out to help people navigate this. Anyone who's suffering from chronic fatigue, myalgic encephalitis, fibromyalgia, long COVID, chronic Lyme's, depression and anxiety, especially if they have any kind of gut issues. These are people who are at a very high risk of being infected without knowing it with
Mm.
something that's very treatable. And I think that's the main message here, is that
Yeah.
maybe what you have isn't just a chronic illness that you're going to have to deal with for your whole life and try dealing with symptomatic care. Maybe this is something that, with the right specialist, can be cured. And
Yeah.
I know we're running out of time, so I'd like to just sort of close with my own situation. I've been on 6 weeks of intense antibiotic therapy intravenously. I was on 3 different antibiotics. I was on metronidazole, a third generation cephalosporin, and doxycycline for 6 weeks. And now I've just finished an 8-week course of treatment with disulfiram, which is antabuse for alcoholics, but it also has antibacterial properties. And whereas I was living with pain levels that were, between 7 and 9 out of 10 every day, my pain levels are now down to 0 to 2 or 3 every day. Whereas I woke up, if I was able to sleep, I would wake up 13, 15 times a night, or I wouldn't sleep at all for the whole night, zero sleep, and definitely non-restorative sleep. Now I'm sleeping through the night most nights. So, I'm converted. I'm a believer,
Mm.
and I'm not the only one. Of course, he has many, many cases that he has told me about. I'll just give you one sort of last amazing example, which is uh, a Green Beret soldier who had been bedridden for 4 years. He had been bedridden, seen all kinds of doctors, and his commander somehow, via, found the name of this specialist. And he brought him to the specialist, who diagnosed pretty much the same bugs that I was diagnosed with. He treated him. It was about a year's worth of treatment, which is about what I'm going to have, about a year's worth of treatment. And within a year, this bedridden soldier, 4-year bedridden soldier, was back on active duty.
Mm.
And his commander said, "Doctor, you have just given me back my best soldier."
Yeah.
And that's just one of many, many stories like that one, and me, that are just propelling me to say, to reach out to people
To
at
help.
risk.
Well, I only have one word, Virginie.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
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 That's right.
It's
Yeah.
so it was such a powerful story to chat to you. When I came to Brain Low, and I think it's certainly something that I hope will spread with the help of the podcast. And I know, obviously, at the end of the podcast, you can see various links to various things, including your own details,
Yeah,
uh, to let people, come into contact and chat and see if we can help more people out, because it's great when you've got something that is supposedly chronic, you're never going to get over it, and then somebody actually tells you, no, we can sort this out.
yeah.
I know the doctors based in the Flemish speaking part of Belgium, but presumably there are other people throughout the world that are
There are.
also,
Yeah,
in that kind of group of people
yeah.
with this doctor who kind of recognize that there are things that we're missing. I know, I remember reading about toxoplasma causing all sorts of issues as well. So it's not just these three bugs; there are other bugs, and as you said, even with long COVID,
That's
uh,
right.
there can be other things going on. It's not
Yeah,
just an inflammatory, right? This is it. Not in all cases,
yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
but we've seen the effect of viruses, protozoa, bacteria in causing all sorts
And
of
molds, yeah. I mean,
weird and
other big
wonderful
ones are
things.
Anaplasma, Ehrlichia.
Yeah.
These types of organisms are also, and just to specify, many people think, for example, that relapsing fever is transmitted only by soft ticks. It's not true. So hard ticks, Dermacentor, Ixodes, these are ticks that can transmit all of these bacteria, parasites, viruses, molds, toxins
Mm,
in one bite. And I said to the doctor, I've never been bitten by a tick. I've never found a tick on me. He said that's normal. He said only
mm,
20% of people who have been bitten by ticks ever know they've been bitten by a tick.
yeah.
Generally, we're talking about nymphs that take a short bite. It's not true that they have to be attached for 3 to 6 days or 1 to 3 days
Yeah.
to transmit Lyme disease. Even they can bite for just a short amount of time, drop right off. You'll never see that nymph.
And of course, we've probably all had a flea inhabit us in the job that we do, and obviously
Absolutely, yeah,
fleas can be significant.
yeah,
And I think maybe one of the little prophylactic messages for people is, I invariably, if I go out into the countryside to walk, I like bird watching, etc. I will always wear long trousers in that situation,
yes,
tuck my
and put some
socks
little
in.
DEET on the bottom of your pants.
Yeah,
And yeah,
exactly, just to protect against these things as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
But Virginie, it's so gratifying. I saw you about 5 or 6 weeks ago. You look even better than you did
thank
five or
you. I
six
feel
weeks
better.
ago, and you can see that there's a little kick in your step now,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
which is great. So obviously we'll have details post podcast that people can get in contact with you, um, and obviously there's a lot of information out there that you can share as well. But
yeah.
just thank you for coming on. I think it's when we've been through an experience ourselves, it's so good to be able to then go out and teach other people about it, isn't it?
Yeah, I really thank you for the opportunity, Anthony, because I think this could change a lot of lives.
Yeah, no, I am concerned that it's a bigger problem than we perhaps realise. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
something we
it
should be
is. Yeah.
looking at. Virginie, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for listening. Um, Please do get in touch with Virginie if you've got any questions. And
Yes.
of course, yeah, welcoming you to another podcast or webinar very soon. Virginie, thanks again. And thanks
Thank you,
everyone for listening.
Anthony.
Take
Have a
care.
great
Bye
day. Thanks a lot.
bye. Bye bye.